The year was 2006. I was standing a little away from the rest of the car party who'd just started on the ministry, and was surprised when an elder, out of the blue, came up to me and said, "50% of what I say from the platform is rubbish." I thought to myself, I know. No one else was in earshot when he said this. Within the local congregations, this elder, whom I'll refer to as Brother 50%, is a highly influential man. I've known him for nearly 30 years, during which time he has had a lot to do with building and selling kingdom halls. I especially remember his involvement with the Bristol Assembly Hall in the UK. He is noted as being a clever and capable teacher. Even to this day, he regularly gives talks to thousands of people. But I had found him out in his teachings as teaching something that was wrong. And that is why I think he confessed to me privately, because his conscience was troubled. He didn't want others to know he was teaching falsehoods, because the thousands of people to whom he regularly gives talks are not allowed to question the teachings of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the organisation he represents. They are supposed to believe they're being told the truth and never question anything. Well, not only did I question things, I had written off to the governing body to ask my questions. And in relation to one particular issue, this clever and influential elder had been asked to go through the matter with me. This was probably because the matter required some depth of knowledge which he had. So I sat with him and one other elder in the music room of a private home. There we spoke about the concerns that I had to do with the use of the word parousia. That is a Greek word that means presence. And I'd never heard the word parousia before. But back in 2005, I was supposed to give a talk on it. The title of this talk was "The Events Associated with Christ's Presence Take Place over a Period of Years." I was to use material from paragraphs 1 and 2 on page 341 of the book Reasoning from the Scriptures. The subject this talk came under was the return of Christ. But in the opening words of the definition of Christ's return, the concept of presence was introduced. Now, in this context, the presence of Christ is his 1,000-year reign, which starts after Christ's return. Christ's return is sometimes known as Armageddon, or the second coming of Christ. If I was talking about Christ's return, then Armageddon and events associated with this take place very fast, even in a moment of time, not over a period of years. Jesus described his return as sudden and quick, like lightning, and obvious like lightning, a sudden flash that everyone sees far and wide. So why were they talking about a period of years in relation to something so sudden like a flash? Eventually, within the talk material, I found what should have been the title of the talk. It'll sound a bit strange, but bear with me. The events associated with Christ's presence, associated with his arrival or return, take place, no, not over a period of years, but at a given time. Well, that was what made sense to me. Christ's presence would start with his return. It would be his arrival time. But because he's already been once before, it would actually be his return time. However, that wasn't what the Watchtower wanted you to understand. So, to get you to understand their idea of return, they added this perspective to the definition of Christ's return. In the reasoning book, they say, it should be noted that there is a difference between coming and presence. Now notice that the word return is not mentioned, but we all know what return means. So why add this perspective? Do you really need someone to help you understand what coming and presence is in relation to return? It's very simple to understand. But another elder explained, if you add just the right amount of perspective, you can justify anything. The reason they were adding this perspective was so they could play a trick with the words coming and presence. I'm going to show you that trick in a minute, but first I will make it clear what the words mean and the three-stage order in which things happen, so you can see how the words get misused later on. The first stage is coming. So let's say your friend lives here. He calls you and invites you to come over to his place. You accept his invitation and you say, "Okay, I'm coming." You're on a journey, which could take a long time or a short time. But your journey ends and the clock stops the minute you arrive at his door. Because you're no longer coming, because you have arrived or returned. And as you step over the threshold, you are making your entrance. Note that word entrance. You'll see later that it's highly significant. So arrival, return, making your entrance is stage 2. It happens after coming. Having made your entrance, now you are present and face to face. This is stage 3, the final stage, being with your friend. Now, like your journey, your presence may last a long period of time or a short period of time. This chap in the picture is staying for 2 days. The clock starts on presence the minute you arrive, and it can last 5 minutes or 5 years or any length of time. Now the chap in the picture is staying for 27 years. That is how long he will be present. So coming can take any amount of time, and presence can take any amount of time. But arrival or return is a moment in time. And this moment is what we are talking about when we say, I'll come at 3 p.m. or I'll be present with you at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. is the point at which you arrive or return. Christ's return is the difference between his coming and presence. It happens after his coming, but before his presence. It is what divides coming and presence. And that dividing point was what my talk was really about. And you would think the reasoning book would say that. But instead it changes the subject subtly from Christ's return to Christ's presence. How does it do this? By getting you to think that presence has no starting point. Having introduced the perspective of coming and presence, the reasoning book continues, thus, while a person's coming, associated with his arrival or return, occurs at a given time, his presence may thereafter extend over a period of years. Do you see? Coming is associated with arrival or return, but presence isn't. In reality, coming ends in return, and presence starts with return. Both are associated with arrival or return. But the Watchtower very subtly disassociates presence from return. Presence is described as happening after return and extending over a period of years, and that is their trick. It's like they've got a card with two faces, which they can show according to whichever face suits them. Because their craftily used words can shift in meaning, and you have to look really hard to see the difference. You think it's talking about one thing, then you find it's talking about something else. I was supposed to give a talk about the return of Christ. Then I found I was supposed to be talking about Christ's presence, with no reference to how that presence started. And the events that were to precede Christ's presence, which we think of as the last days, were also the signs that Christ's presence had started. That meant they were the signs that Christ was coming, and also the signs that he had come. In this way, presence becomes the presence of the invisible man. So not Jesus returning literally, but returning his invisible attention to the earth. So it's as if when Jesus went to heaven, he just got bored waiting. So he went and did something else, like watched a game of tennis until 1914 came. Then he kicked Satan out of heaven and returned his attention to the earth, invisibly. Their reasoning was utterly ridiculous. So this was the issue I was discussing with Brother 50%, that Christ's presence spoken of in Matthew 24, was really the start of Christ's presence and took place during a sudden, unexpected, brief moment in time, comparable to the day Noah entered into the ark, when the flood came and swept them all away. Not a long period of time. I imagined Brother 50% would agree with me, but I sensed I had to be cautious with him. Therefore, before this meeting took place, I determined to check and double-check all my facts, just in case he argued with me. You see, on several occasions I had heard him speak about a Hebrew translation of the book of Matthew by a man called Shem Tob. He said that Shem Tob's Hebrew translation of the Greek word parousia brought an enhanced perspective to the meaning of the word parousia, and possibly the book of Matthew was originally written in Hebrew and later translated into Greek. When he gave these talks, I didn't know any Hebrew and I didn't fully understand what he was saying. So before I met with him and the other elder in the music room, I decided to do some very careful research on Shem Tob and the Hebrew word he used for the Greek word parousia, which meant presence. Well, what I discovered was that Shem Tob did not use the Hebrew word for presence. Actually, he used the Hebrew word for coming, specifically a Hebrew word that means entrance. Do you see the significance of that word entrance now? The Hebrew word for entrance is bia. That's the exact point at which someone arrives at the door and steps over the threshold in an instant of time. It's when they make their entrance. I suppose you could say it's the time that somebody will be here. Well, joking aside, I was very pleased with the research I had done. It backed up my reasoning exactly. And if Brother 50% argued with me, I would bring this matter up. During our meeting, Brother 50% tried to be kind to me. He opened our meeting by telling me that not for 1 minute did he imagine I was apostate, which was heartening, because I hadn't thought it for 1 minute either. Then he went on to politely argue with me, so that our discussion got nowhere, and I decided it was time to raise the issue of Shem Tob's Hebrew translation of the word parousia. Brother 50%, I said, you are aware of Shem Tob, are you not? Shem Tob, he replied, with a kind of jubilant and triumphant air. I know him well. Tell me, I asked, what word did Shem Tob use to translate the word parousia? Well, what happened next stunned me. You see, Brother 50% had not expected me to know any Hebrew, and I wonder if he had ever been challenged on his deep biblical knowledge like this before. So, having exuded this air of triumphant jubilation, he suddenly took on the air of a lizard, and he hissed at me, "He used the wrong word." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I raised my eyebrows and, half smiling, said, "So what would the right word have been then?" Now, Brother 50% became livid, and he spoke with even more venom and anger and hissed, "We don't speculate on that." He was like an angry creature, cornered. I could have pushed him further, but I'd made my point and seen clearly that he had no answer. so I backed off because I respected him and did not want to destroy our friendship. The other elder, witnessing all this, interjected and said, "Well, does it really matter? This is only a grey area." He could see how angry Brother 50% had become, and although this other elder didn't fully understand what we were talking about, he was doing his best to try and keep Brother 50% calm. Now, back in 2006, I didn't realise the matter was actually more serious than just a grey area, but I was happy to let it go at that, so long as nobody expected me to teach or believe such utter rubbish. So I agreed with the other elder, and Brother 50% calmed down and said this: "I do not agree with you for 1 minute, but it is just possible that you are right." And I took his words to mean, "Well, yes, of course you're right, but I'm not at liberty to agree with you." I didn't fully understand why he couldn't agree with me. That being so, after the meeting ended, I gave little further thought to what happened in that music room. I felt he'd been silly, and he knew full well he was completely wrong. But that meeting must have stuck in his mind, because it was about 2 weeks after that meeting that he came up to me in that car park and out of the blue privately confessed to me that 50% of what he said from the platform was rubbish. Now, the year is 2019, so it's some 13 years after this event happened. And I have recently had the door of fellowship closed on me by the Watchtower organisation, because I later found out that 1914 rests on a maths trick that involves changing the scriptures at Daniel 1:1 and Daniel 2:1. I blew the whistle on this. Therefore, 5 so-called elders were appointed to treat me with dishonour and unkindness by calling me to something that they referred to as a judicial. But it certainly had nothing to do with justice. So I refused to attend. But an hour before this event was to take place, I turned up at the Kingdom Hall to give these 5 men one last chance to turn away from their foolishness. I tried very hard to get them to examine the scriptures and see what the Bible really teaches. At one point during this exchange, I brought up the fact that Brother 50%, whom they all knew, had confessed to me that 50% of what he said from the platform was rubbish. Their answer to me was, "Oh, Brother 50%, we know he says a lot of things in jest and he was probably only joking." "No," I replied, "he wasn't joking." But these unkind elders took no notice of me and went off to their room to agree amongst themselves that they would slander me and get the coordinator of the body of elders to tell the congregation, of which I had been a part since 1992, that I was opposed to the God of Abraham because I stuck to the words of the prophet Daniel and the prophet Ezekiel and Jeremiah, rather than the governing body of the Watchtower. It was after this horrible event that I realised, oh, that was why Brother 50% had made sure no one else could hear what he was saying to me in that car park. It was so there were no witnesses, and if I ever repeated what he had said to me, he could simply deny it by saying he was only joking. But what Brother 50% forgot was that there was a witness to what he said, and I'll name my witness. His name is Jehovah. So let Almighty God himself pronounce on whether this man was joking or not.